So today I want to talk about a new feature coming to Ember Octane that I'm super excited about. A lot of folks have been talking about this because we think it's going to be one of the most drastic changes to how we write Ember code in our templates and some of the composability benefits it affords. And these are modifiers. If you want to learn more about modifiers, I would recommend checking out this awesome blog post by Chris Garrett. In it, he kind of lays out what has already landed and kind of brainstorms some ideas for how we might be able to use this. But today, you can use a very low-level version, what's called a Modifier Manager, to get some of the benefits of this. Now, Spencer Price took these ideas and made something called Ember Functional Modifiers, which is one implementation of what the final public API for modifiers might end up looking like, you know, several months down the road once they're finalized. But they do use the public API from that modifier manager that exists now in Ember. And what these do is let you use this today writing code like this. So this is what I want to explore in this video and what I want to talk about with you today. So let's get into this. What we're going to do is come over here, and I've got Ember map running locally here. And this is one of our video pages where you can watch our videos. And right here we have this UI element that lets us control the video player. So we can increase the speed. If we start playing a video, we can skip forward 15 seconds or back 15 seconds. And for these controls, we used to have tooltips that would show when you hover these icons because it's not 100% clear what they mean. So let's pull this open in our code base. So I think this is called the video control bar template. There we see that video controls label. And here, it looks like the actual component that renders those controls is called Playback Controls, which is right here. So we have some keyboard shortcuts, but if we look here, we see kind of the undo icon we're using for the skip back 15 seconds. Here's the minus icon, which decreases the playback rate. This shows what the actual playback rate is. Here's the increased speed, and then here is the fast forward one as well. So you can actually see here, and this is Ember Map's production code base, that I used to have a tooltip here, and I think I might have just kind of started going down this path, but just never really finished it. And this is kind of a dumb component. It's just renders a tooltip. It takes an attach to, which is a CSS selector, and so we can see data attachment ID equals increased speed. And if we come up here to the plus, we can see that right here. So let's put this on a new line. And we can see we've just kind of marked this using this data attachment ID so that we can attach this tooltip to it. So if I save this, we should be able to come check the app. And we can see the tooltip is right there. Now I can also come back just for the purpose of this video here and default this is showing controls to true, so that bar is always open. Now, of course, we don't want the tooltip to kind of always be there. We want it to be there when we hover. So one way we could do this would be with something like on mouse enter, and this is going to be an action that mutates is showing tooltip to true, and on mouse leave, we can go ahead and mutate that to false. And then down here, we can conditionally render this if we're showing the tooltip. Go ahead and render this tooltip and attach it to this button. So if we come back to the app, now when we hover over this thing, we see the tooltip. So that's pretty cool. But this is kind of a lot of work. It's a little annoying. And let's say we wanted to come here and add a tooltip to our redo button. Well, now we have to do something similar where we do this. Maybe we change the name of this and we have another block here. We could also use these actions to send the right data attachment ID to some state on this component and then attach the tooltip there. And I think what I've done in even another video is make it so that the caller doesn't even need to do this. We don't need these events at all on the actual element. Just by virtue of actually rendering this tooltip, we can make this a lot smarter. And maybe in its did insert element hook, it would actually reach out into the DOM, find the right element here that corresponds to this attached to label, and then go ahead and use add event listener and remove event listener to wire up those events such that when we hover over this thing, it would then know how to render. And that would make UI Tooltip, a little bit more reusable, and it's more intelligent in the sense that it's not just a dumb presenter component anymore. And that makes it easier because then we could just do something like data attachment ID for fast forward, and then we could just kind of copy this thing and say attach to fast forward, and then we could add our label here. And I think the keyboard shortcut for that is L. So that's kind of like the most reusable way to do this today with just components. Notice that we need to name each one of these things in order to link it with this. And then we need some sort of API to pass that name into this component such that those two things can be linked. Now, what we're really trying to do here, if we look at just this implementation, is link something with this button element. And the cool thing about modifiers is that modifiers go right here in element space. So this is a new modifier that can be run and gets access to this element. And in this way, it can clean up some of these APIs whereby in the past we've had to use something like a data ID just to give something a name so that maybe a component or some other part of our UI can reference a particular element. The cool thing about modifiers is they kind of just have access to the element in which they're invoked, meaning we don't have to give them a name. It's kind of like point-free programming brought to our templates. So as I was kind of reading the blog post and looking at Spencer's add-on, I was just trying to think of a fun way that's the most easiest way to add a tooltip to any element in my app. Maybe it's not going to be the most flexible UI component ever, but what would be the easiest way I could just drop a tooltip on basically anything and have it just work? And if you can imagine with a modifier, let's say we had a tooltip modifier. And in this case, our tooltips are just text. So what if I could do this? And that way I get rid of this. And I don't need this attachment ID either because again, this thing already has access to its element. So what if we could come up with an API that worked like this? Look how easy it would be to just come here and say, let's just add a tooltip to this button. And now this is going to say fast forward L. I mean, you can't get much easier than that. There's no wiring to do here at all. So this is what we're going to try to do today using this new add-on. So I'll just save this to start because this is kind of where we want to end up. And I'm going to come back and cancel my server. Over here, we're going to install Spencer's add-on. It's called Ember Functional Modifiers. And Ember Map right now, if we come look at our package JSON, we see that we're running Ember CLI 3.4 and Ember Source 3.4 as well. And Robert Jackson has a polyfill for the API, the low-level API that has been merged. The RFC has been merged and it's come to Ember. And this will polyfill older versions of Ember. The actual API landed in 3.8. So if you're in 3.8, this polyfill won't really be needed. But I'm just going to install this now so that we can use this and start using Spencer's add-on. So once those are both installed, we can come back and run Ember serve. We can close the polyfill, and we'll just take a look at the instructions here for Ember functional modifiers. So the basic idea is this. We create a new modifiers directory under app. We can create the name of the modifier here. We import this function from this add-on, and then we export make functional modifier, which takes the element in which the modifier is being invoked, and also any parameters. And then we get to use it just like this. We get to call this new scroll top modifier right from within an element. So let's go ahead and copy this example. And I'm going to come up here to our app, and we'll create a modifiers folder, and we'll create a tooltip.js file. So we import this, and just to start, let's go ahead and just log this out. So we'll just add a console.log, and this is where we're running the actual modifier. And once we refresh this, with any luck, we should be able to see something. And there we do. We see that we're running. Now, if I go ahead and log the element here, let's just take a look at this. This is the first argument to this function, so we can save that. And now we see the actual element that's being logged is the button, and this is the button in the DOM. It's the actual element instance. And again, this comes right from the fact that we're rendering this modifier inside of this button. So this is really, really cool. And if we come here and log out the second argument to this, this is actually going to be a list of args, and it's an array because, you know, if we were to pass in Tooltip and then some other argument, we would want to be able to get access to all of these in our helper. But in our case, we only have one. So we'll stick with this kind of signature right here and just call this text. So we should be able to log text, save this. And once our app reloads, we should see the element and the text for our tooltip. So we have the data we need to render our UI tooltip component and attach it to this element, since we kind of have hold of an instance of this element now. But we actually still need to render it, right? Down here, we were just invoking it. The actual component invocation was right down here. But ideally, we would just be able to drop this modifier kind of anywhere in our app and have a tooltip work. So the strategy I'm going to use to accomplish that is to basically grab this, and I'm going to open up our application template here. And you know, this is an application template for our Ember app, so it's kind of always rendered. And what I'm going to do is create a new global service that I'm going to use to kind of share data from these modifiers to the rest of the application. And that way our application template will be able to look and see if there's any kind of active tooltips that need to be rendered so that it can take care of that. And that way we don't have to sprinkle these UI tooltips all over our application. So what might this look like? Well, if we had something like a tooltip service, and maybe it had a tips array, we could just each over them right here. And then we could render the tooltip, attach it to the target element here. So maybe each tooltip has an element. And then as far as the contents go, maybe the tip has a text as well. So if we can kind of get an array of element and text pairs, then our application template can take care of actually rendering the UI tooltips. And fortunately enough for us, that's exactly what we get with these modifiers, right? We have the element and the text. So all we need is really this global tooltip service we can use to communicate this information back up to the application template. So why don't we just do that? We'll come down to services. I'll create a tooltip service. And in init, I'm just going to say this.tips is an array. And I think I need this to be observable. So let's go ahead and import array. And we can import this named helper here and just wrap this JavaScript array like this. And so now we just basically have a service with this kind of empty tips array here. And back in our application template, in our controller, we can come here and just give that controller access to our tooltip service. Okay, so we still shouldn't see anything in our application here, but if we come back to our actual modifier code, we've got one more step, and that is to somehow get this element and text into our tooltip service. So how might we do that? Well, fortunately for us, if we come back to the Ember Functional Modifiers add-on, we see that modifiers support service injection. And it says the way we do this is by supplying an injection object before the modifier function. For example, suppose you want to track click events with Ember metrics. So here's an example track click modifier. Here's the actual function logic, which operates on the arguments and the element. And then down here, make functional modifier takes in an object with a services key and an array of services that this modifier needs access to. So ours is going to look just like this. We're going to pass in tooltips, and then in our function, we'll get tooltips in as the first argument, then our element, and then our text. So let's just kind of copy this and bring it into our app. So we'll just call this function add tooltip. I'll delete this example code here. And instead of metrics, we want a tooltip service injection here. So we get the tooltip service, we get the element, and then we get the text. So let's just log these and make sure everything's still wired up correctly, and we'll delete our old function logic. And we can also add a log for the tooltip service. So let's switch back to our app, and we can see it reloaded. We still have the element and the text, but now we have access to this service of ours. So we should be able to do something like let tip equals element and text. This is kind of the data structure we're going to use for our tooltips. And then with the tooltips service, we can just call .tips add object tip. So let's save this and take a look. And there we go, just like that, we've got the tooltip showing. Now, one of the reasons this works is if we come back to our application template, we're actually passing the element instance into attach to. Whereas before, remember, it looked a little different. We were passing in kind of this text-based CSS selector. Well, this is because if we crack open UI Tooltips template, we see that it's using a modal dialog, which comes from the Ember modal dialog library, and that takes in a tether target. And tether target just so happens to expect either a string that it can use to query the DOM for the right element or an actual element instance. So this is really where the modifier architecture is paying off for us. And again, it gives us this kind of point-free way to attach logic to element instances, because now we no longer have to come up with a name for it. We can just come back to our playback controls here and just say, you know, we already have the instance. The tooltip has access to the instance of this element. It can just go ahead and give that to our global service, which our global service can then use to pass to a UI tooltip. So this is pretty neat. Now, there's one more thing we have to do, of course, because this is just showing up right now, even when we don't hover over it. So if we just refresh, you know, as soon as that modifier runs, it's adding it to that array on our service, which is just going to render this. But we really only want it to render when we mouse over this. So we can add that logic directly to our tooltip modifier. So what we're going to do is, given that we have this element instance, we're just going to take element and call add event listener. Let's add a listener for the mouse enter event. And when that happens, we'll call tooltips add object. Let's see if this works. Okay, we don't see the tooltip. And when I hover, we see it. Let's go ahead and add the mouse leave event. So on mouse leave, we're just going to call tooltips.tips.remove object. So we're kind of just pushing and popping our tooltip object right here to this global array. Let's save this, give it a shot. Just like that, we got a tooltip working. Console seems clean, so it seems like there's no errors or anything like that. And now we can come back to our template and look at just how easy this is to get this working. So let's add some more tooltips here. This one is fast forward, and this is an L shortcut. We'll add this to a new line. This one is decrease speed, which is U. And right here, we've got rewind. So if we save that, come back and check our app, just like that, we've got some new tooltips here. Now this looks a little bit off. I think there might be a spacing issue here. I think this has a little bit more padding than these other ones. I want to make sure that's not the modifier doing anything funny. And yeah, it looks like this has padding of 3, whereas the rest of these have padding of 3 in the X direction, padding of 2 in the Y direction. So let's just fix that while we're here. And now everything's lining up. We were able to add 4 new tooltips to this page super quick. And yeah, this is a very reusable API. And now we can even take this and put it basically anywhere on the app. So this little icon is kind of autoplay next. And again, it's not super clear. So let's just find this. If I were to look at this in the actual DOM, we see that this has an autoplay control. So let's do a find for autoplay control. And here it is. This is just an anchor tag. Let's drop a tooltip right here. And we can just say autoplay next video. So we'll save this, come back to our app. There we go. Now we've got a new tooltip down here. So we can see it works on buttons, it works on anchor tags. It's a super flexible way to just execute kind of some arbitrary code that needs to work with some element. And whereas before we would maybe need to add some marker to an element, give it a reference somehow so that we can refer to it from our component, now we can just make really cool APIs like this. And of course there's trade-offs with rendering tooltips like this. Really this only takes text. So if we wanted something more rich where you could pass in a block of handlebars to it, we'd want to drop back down to our UI tooltip in the template. But the fact that we can make something like this that's so easy to use kind of everywhere in our application and it works great is really exciting. It really unlocks whole new patterns of composition for Ember applications. And I love that we can use it in the template like this. And there's even more to this. These modifiers, if they need to do some cleanup work, you can return a function from them to do some cleanup work. The fact that they can access services makes them very powerful, as we've seen. And again, this is not the final form of what userland modifiers will be written like. This is one experimental example that uses this kind of function signature to do it. You could also imagine a class-based modifier that looks more like the kind of way we write components and other objects in Ember apps. You might make a modifier class and have service injections and lifecycle hooks like that. So that actual API is still shaking out, but we do have these low-level tools in 3.8 and really far back with that polyfill, which lets us do stuff like this today. So I definitely recommend experimenting with this. This is kind of one of the more exciting parts of Octane, one of the most exciting parts of Octane coming. And I really think we're going to see kind of an explosion of really great ideas coming to the Ember ecosystem with modifiers that make it really easy to add tooltips or track click events or deal with scrolling issues or how far someone has come to a page. All sorts of things that would really be kind of cumbersome to add to an app are now going to be super easy to add throughout your app using modifiers. So I hope you found that useful and exciting. I know I'm excited about this and I can't wait to play around with it some more.